This isn't just a scan. You're prodding a sleeping predator." Commander Lyron Varick's words cut through the tension on the bridge of the Kavlar scout ship, Virak. His sharp gaze locked onto the junior officer at the helm, the dim glow of the laser plasma displays reflecting off his weathered features. "Deactivate the probe, now." Tynok Kalar hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. The younger officer's breathing quickened as the heads-up display projected a network of human cryoships, drifting in a slow orbit above a pale, forgotten star. The intricate lattice of the vessels gleamed like constellations, their design simultaneously ancient and uncomfortably alien. "Commander, the energy fluctuations are irrelevant," Lyron barked, his tone cold as steel. He stepped closer, his boots echoing sharply against the deck plating. "There's a reason the galaxy fears them, Kalar. Shut it down." The tension in the air was suffocating. Every crew member at their station caught between obeying orders and staring at the anomaly dominating their screens. The cryoships were massive, their sleek, shadowed forms almost organic in their contours, like sleeping leviathans in a voidless ocean. No one spoke of it openly, but everyone knew the rule: don't wake the humans. The Virak crept closer to the edge of the fleet, its external lights extinguished, as though any sign of life might draw the sleeping monster's attention. The interior lights were dimmed to a muted gold, casting elongated shadows across the angular walls. Outside, the human vessels loomed larger, their surfaces flickering with strange energies, patterns that seemed almost alive, like the rippling skin of a beast dreaming of the hunt. "Commander," murmured High Strategist Rylith Sakaya, her voice a low, controlled melody. "Do you truly believe the legends? That they destroyed their own galaxy?" Lyron's jaw tightened. "I don't believe in legends, Rylith. I believe in what I've seen." His hand hovered near the console, fingers flexing as if to release pent-up energy. "And what I've seen is enough to know we're playing with fire." The bridge's silence deepened as everyone absorbed the weight of his words. The faint vibrations of the ship's systems thrummed underfoot, but they felt distant, like the heartbeat of something far away. Each crew member exchanged nervous glances, their anxiety palpable. Tynok broke the silence, his youthful voice trembling under the burden of his defiance. "The energy readings suggest, Commander, this isn't just advanced technology, it's evolution. This cryo-fleet is centuries, no, millennia, beyond anything in our database. If we could just stop." Lyron's voice, low and edged, froze the young officer mid-sentence. "You think we're the first to try? You think those archives filled themselves with warnings by accident?" "But no! Listen carefully, Kalar." Lyron leaned forward, his shadow swallowing the younger officer. His words came slowly, heavy with unspoken pain. "Every species that ignored the rule ended up erased. Entire fleets, entire planets gone. The last thing they saw was that—" He gestured toward the display, where one of the cryoships rotated slightly, its hull glinting as if in acknowledgement. "Coming for them." A shiver ran through the bridge as an alert pinged across the heads-up displays. The central plasma display shifted, focusing on one of the smaller human vessels. Its dormant systems emitted a soft glow, and the alien script etched along its hull pulsed with an eerie rhythm. "I didn't do anything," Tynok blurted, his crystalline input tool slipping from his hand. The displays erupted in data streams. Heat signatures spiked across the fleet. Systems long dormant stirred, their mechanisms creaking with an unsettling vitality, as if they had simply been waiting to be disturbed. "Shields up!" Lyron snapped. "Rylith, tactical assessment, now." "Uncertain," Rylith replied, her normally composed demeanor faltering. Her sharp blue eyes flicked between streams of alien data. "Their systems are reacting to something. No known patterns match this. It's like they're recalibrating." The ship's exterior sensors captured the fleet in intricate detail, feeding a surreal image to the main display. The human vessels didn't seem to wake so much as stretch. Thin tendrils of energy snaked between ships, binding them together in a web of light. The air on the bridge thickened, the smell of heated metal mixing with a faint, sharp tang that clung to the back of their throats. "Contact!" shouted a tactical officer. The display zoomed in on a sudden flash of movement, a swarm of drones, sleek and predatory, emerging from the nearest cryoship. Their forms shifted unnervingly, as though they couldn't decide on a single shape. "They're adapting," Rylith whispered. "Defensive formation, now!" Lyran's voice cracked like a whip. The ship's turrets rotated into position, and automated targeting systems hummed to life. "Focus fire on the drones. Do not engage the fleet directly." The drones moved faster than anything the crew had encountered, their trajectories unpredictable. They sliced through the void in sharp arcs, their surfaces absorbing or deflecting the plasma bolts fired from the leviathans. Each impact rippled harmlessly along their bodies, like raindrops on polished stone. "Minimal effect," called a gunnery officer. "Redirect fire to disrupt their formation," Lyran ordered, his mind racing. "Force them into choke points." The drones responded almost instantly, altering their movements as if anticipating the tactic. They flanked the scout ship, weaving through its defensive screen and firing precision plasma bursts at the hull. The ship groaned under the assault, sparks raining from overhead conduits. "Damage to external stabilizers!" shouted an engineer, gripping the edge of his console. Rylith's voice cut through the chaos. "Commander, they're hurting us! Toward the center of the fleet!" Lyran's heart pounded. He slammed his fist against the console. "They're testing us!" The bridge descended into chaos as the drones closed in, their glowing forms casting eerie shadows across the crew. Lyran's mind raced. This wasn't a battle, it was an evaluation, a trial. And they were failing. "Tynock," Lyran growled, "what did you activate?" I didn't mean to," Tynock stammered, his face pale. "The probe. It was a passive scan, but their systems must have interpreted." "Do you realize what you've done?" Lyran's voice rose, his usual restraint crumbling. "You've woken something that should never have been disturbed." Before Tynock could respond, the main plasma display shifted. A new signal emerged, a transmission. The sound was jagged, raw, like static grinding against metal. Slowly, it resolved into something chillingly coherent. "Unauthorized interference detected. Protocols. Engaged." The voice was unlike anything they had heard before, layered and resonant, each word echoing as if spoken by countless voices in unison. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact. On the display, the largest of the human cryoships turned. Its front section unfurled like a predator baring its fangs, revealing a glowing core of energy that pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. The crew watched in stunned silence as a single word appeared across the heads-up display, written in their own language. "Observe." Lyran's stomach twisted. He tore his gaze away from the display, forcing himself to focus. "All hands, prepare for emergency retreat. Rylith, give me options." Rylith's hands danced over her console, her composure cracking under the weight of the impossible. "Options? There are none, not against this." The drones halted their assault, hovering ominously as if waiting for a command. The display zoomed in on the glowing core of the lead ship. Energy rippled outward, distorting the stars around it. And then, with a deafening roar of light and motion, the human fleet began to wake. The cryoship's core burned like a second sun on the laser plasma display, radiating waves of energy that pulsed through the ship's systems. The leviathans shuddered violently, its stabilizers groaning in protest as it was dragged into the heart of the human fleet's formation. The display stuttered, unable to keep up with the sudden torrent of data pouring in, its projected interface flickering with cascading alerts. Commander Lyran Varric gripped the railing tightly as the ship tilted under the gravitational force emanating from the awakening fleet. The bridge was alive with chaos, officers scrambling to counteract the pull, panicked shouts colliding in the air. Above it all, Lyran's voice cut through like a blade. "Rylith, status report now!" High Strategist Rylith Sakah's hands moved with controlled urgency, her sharp, angular features illuminated by the dim light of her console. "It's not gravitational. It's something else. A containment field, maybe, but it's unlike anything in our archives. Her tone faltered for the first time. Commander, their technology isn't just advanced, it's rewriting the rules. Helpful, Lyran bit out, his frustration barely contained. Can we break free? Unlikely, she replied, her eyes narrowing as she processed the impossible data. Their systems aren't reacting to us, they're analyzing us. The realization hit Lyran like a blow to the chest. They're studying us. The Virakthal jolted again, a metallic screech reverberating through the hull as the cryo ship's energy web latched onto their shields. Sparks burst from the bridge's overhead conduits, filling the air with the sharp, bitter tang of scorched insulation. The scent curled into Lyran's nose, mingling with the heat radiating from the failing systems. Commander, Tynok Kalar's voice cracked as he stumbled to steady himself. They're mapping our ship. Every system, every defense, they're pulling us apart. Lyran turned sharply toward the younger officer, his eyes narrowing into slits. And whose fault is that? I can fix this, Tynok stammered, his trembling hands dancing over the console, the laser plasma display filled with frantic code as he attempted to reverse the probe's activation. His face was slick with sweat, his desperation as palpable as the ship's failing atmosphere. Enough, Lyran snapped, stepping toward him. This isn't a simulation, Kellar, this is real. Lives are at stake, and you've given them the keys to our destruction. Before Tynok could respond, a sharp, discordant tone filled the bridge. The display shifted, focusing on a single cryopod nestled deep within the human flagship. Frosted glass cracked under the pressure of rising heat, revealing a silhouette within, motionless, yet undeniably alive. The bridge fell silent as every crew member stared at the image. The figure was humanoid, but its proportions were subtly wrong. It exuded an alien stillness, the kind that evoked unease rather than familiarity. As the frost melted away, a pair of eyes snapped open, glowing with an otherworldly luminescence that seemed to pierce through the display and into their souls. They're waking, Rylith said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Lyran felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders, heavier than the uniform he wore, heavier than the chain of command that bound him. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the fear coursing through him with the tactical clarity he was known for. "Reinforce the shields," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "If we're going down, we're not going down without a fight." The cryopod opened with a hiss, releasing plumes of vapor that coiled like serpents around the figure within. The sensors on the Virakthal flickered madly, unable to comprehend the energy signatures emanating from the awakening human. The bridge was bathed in an eerie, shifting light that seemed to pulse in time with the cryo ship's core. "Commander," Rylith said, her voice tight with unease, "we're receiving another transmission." "Put it through," Lyran said, his jaw tightening as he braced himself. The voice that filled the bridge was deep, resonant, and laced with an unshakable authority. It was both calm and unyielding, like the eye of a storm. "Identify yourselves," it commanded. "You have trespassed on sovereign grounds." Lyran stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "This is Commander Lyran Varric of the Kevlar Alliance. We were conducting a routine scan." "A lie," the voice interrupted. "Your intentions were invasive, your actions deliberate. We are aware." The accusation hit like a physical blow, but Lyran didn't flinch. "If you know so much, then you know we mean no harm. We're here to observe, not to provoke." "Observation is irrelevant," the voice replied, each word weighted with finality. "You have woken us." The transmission ended abruptly, replaced by a growing hum. No, not a hum, but a vibration that resonated deep within their bones. The cryoships began to shift, their once static formation now alive with movement. The energy web connecting them crackled and sparked, creating a symphony of light that danced across the bridge. "Commander, they're powering up weapon systems," Rylith said, her voice tight with urgency. "And their targeting is adaptive. They're learning from our defenses." Lyran's mind raced. The Virakthal wasn't built for direct combat, especially not against something of this magnitude. "Deploy decoys," he ordered. Redirect all energy to propulsion. We're getting out of here. Tynok's hands trembled as he worked the console, his earlier bravado replaced by sheer terror. Their energy signatures are overwhelming our systems. If we don't break free now— "We will," Lyran said, his tone brooking no argument. "Rylith, what's the nearest safe zone?" "There isn't one," she replied grimly. "Not if they pursue." Lyran's eyes flicked back to the display, where the cryofleet moved with terrifying coordination. The ships seemed to breathe in unison, their movements deliberate yet fluid. It was like watching a predator circle its prey, each motion calculated to inspire fear. "Then we don't give them a reason to," Lyran said, his voice quieter now. "We retreat, and we warn the Alliance." The leviathan lurched as its engines roared to life, the ship breaking away from the fleet with a burst of speed. The cryoships didn't follow immediately, their predatory stillness more unnerving than outright pursuit. Lyran could feel their gaze, an intangible weight pressing against his thoughts. As the ship cleared the edge of the formation, a final transmission crackled through. This time, the voice was different, calmer, colder, and infinitely more unsettling. "Run. Warn your people. It won't matter." The transmission ended, and with it the bridge fell into an uneasy silence. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their expressions a mix of relief and dread. Lyran let out a slow breath, his grip on the railing loosening slightly. "What now?" Tynok asked, his voice small. Lyran turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Now, Kalar, we prepare for a war we might not survive." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Outside the viewport, the human fleet drifted silently, their lights dimming as if to lull their enemies into a false sense of security. But Lyran knew better. The leviathans dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the jagged asteroid belt surrounding the Coalition's nearest fallback point, Craghold Station. The station itself was a cold, angular fortress, nestled in the shadow of a dying star, its surface coated in thick black plating that absorbed what little light remained in the system. It was no sanctuary, just a temporary refuge. Inside the leviathan, tension coiled in every corner. The bridge lights flickered erratically as overworked systems struggled to stabilize. The heads-up displays cast fragmented data across the walls, fractured projections painting a chaotic picture of the situation. Commander Lyran Varric stood at the center, his eyes scanning the broken streams of information, piecing together what little they had learned. "We bought ourselves time," Rylith said, her voice tight, as she approached from the tactical station. "Not much, though. The humans didn't follow, but I doubt they're idle." "They're watching," Lyran murmured, his voice low but weighted with certainty. He could feel it, a predator's gaze lingering just out of sight, analyzing, deciding their next move. Behind them, Tynok Keller was hunched over the console, his hands trembling as he cycled through the ship's damage reports. The occasional spark from a cracked panel lit up his pale face, his nervous energy radiating through the room. "Commander," Tynok stammered, not daring to meet Lyran's gaze. "The cryoships, they weren't just dormant. Their systems, they were evolving. Every scan we sent triggered an adaptation. They turned our curiosity into their advantage," Lyran interrupted, his tone sharp enough to make the younger officer flinch. "We're dealing with an enemy that learns faster than we can react. Forget the myths, forget the warnings. We need strategy, not speculation." "Which strategy?" Rylith asked, her tone calm but pointed. "We don't know their full capabilities. We don't know their intent. Everything we've seen so far points to one conclusion. They're years ahead of us, and they're not afraid to remind us of it." The ship's comms crackled, cutting through the heavy air. A distorted voice, low and guttural, emanated from the speakers. "Craghold Station to leviathan. Approach vector confirmed. Be advised. Multiple Coalition fleets are en route. Situation escalating." Lyran glanced at Rylith, his expression unreadable. "Let's hope the Coalition is prepared to escalate with it." As the ship approached the station, the asteroid field loomed around them like a broken graveyard. The scattered rock formations reflected dim, ruddy light, their jagged edges glinting like the shattered remains of something ancient. The field offered concealment, but it also felt like a trap, a labyrinth waiting to collapse. "Helm, keep us in the field," Lyran ordered. "I don't want the station visible from here." "Why?" Tynock asked, his voice hesitant but curious. Lyran's eyes didn't leave the display. "Because they're coming, and if they're as methodical as I think, they'll target our allies first." The first sign of the attack came not from sensors, but from the stars themselves. Bright flashes erupted on the edge of the field, sudden bursts of light that burned too white, too hot to be natural. The heads-up display flickered again, this time resolving into a scattering of coalition ships frantically maneuvering to escape an unseen enemy. "Contact!" Rylith called, her voice sharp. "Multiple ships engaged. Sector 11, just outside the station perimeter." Lyran straightened. "Are they human?" "They're not broadcasting identification," she replied, her fingers gliding over the tactical interface. "But they don't move like coalition forces. Their formations are predatory." Lyran didn't hesitate. "Bring up the feed." The central laser plasma display shifted, projecting a live view of the battle unfolding near the station. Coalition frigates scattered like prey animals, their energy shields flaring in desperate attempts to hold off an onslaught of sleek, obsidian war drones. The drones moved in synchronized waves, their surfaces shimmering with adaptive energy that absorbed and redirected every incoming strike. The coalition's counterattacks looked like sparks against the void, ineffectual and fleeting. One frigate spun out of formation as its engines failed, its hull splitting apart under the relentless assault. The soundless explosion illuminated the field for a brief moment, casting stark shadows across the bridge. "They're testing us again," Rylith said, her voice grim. "Targeting small groups, learning how we respond." Lyran's fists clenched, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest like a vice. "We're not going to let them finish that test." He turned to the comms officer. "Patch me through to the station." Moments later, the voice of Craghold's defensive commander, Darren Axton, filled the bridge. "Commander Varric, what the hell is happening out there? We're losing ships faster than we can reinforce." "They're forcing chaos," Lyran said, his voice firm. "Regroup your forces into tighter formations. Pull them back into the asteroid field. Scatter their targeting algorithms." "They'll pick us off if we clump together," Axton argued. "They'll pick you off if you stay scattered," Lyran shot back. "This isn't conventional warfare. They're not engaging. They're dissecting. Make them fight for it." Axton hesitated, then relented. "Understood. Formations incoming." The leviathan darted between the asteroids, its engines leaving faint ripples of heat in its wake. Lyran watched the heads-up display as coalition ships began pulling back into the field, their movements now deliberate and coordinated. The human drones followed, their predatory grace almost mesmerizing as they weaved through the chaos. "They're not retreating," Tynock whispered, his eyes wide as he stared at the tactical readout. "Of course they're not," Lyran said, his tone colder than the void beyond the ship. "They're watching us, adapting, but they haven't seen what happens when we fight back." The leviathan reached the edge of the formation. Lyran's hand hovered over the command console, his mind racing through the variables. He needed a distraction, something to buy time for the coalition forces to regroup. "Deploy mines," he ordered. "Focus on the field's choke points. Force them to overextend." Rylith raised an eyebrow. "That's not going to stop them." "It's not supposed to stop them," Lyran said, his voice steady. "It's supposed to make them think." The mines detonated in fiery bursts as the drones swept through the asteroid field. The shockwaves rippled through the debris, sending smaller rocks hurtling in all directions. For a moment, the drones hesitated, their movements less fluid as they adjusted to the sudden chaos. "That's it," Lyran muttered under his breath. "Show me how you think." The drones reformed into smaller clusters, their adaptive energy fields shimmering as they recalculated their approach. But their hesitation was enough. The coalition ships, now tightly grouped, launched a coordinated counterattack, their combined firepower cutting through the weakened formations. A cheer erupted on the bridge as one of the drones exploded, its adaptive field finally overwhelmed. They're not invincible, Rylith said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. No, Lyran agreed, his expression grim. But they'll remember this, and they'll learn. As the drones began to retreat, the heads-up display flickered again. This time, it wasn't a tactical readout or a damage report. It was a message, scrawled across the display in sharp, angular text. Test complete. Lyran's stomach sank. He stared at the message, the weight of its implications settling over him like a shroud. They're not retreating, he said quietly. They're preparing for the next phase. Rylith's eyes met his, her expression mirroring his unease. And what's the next phase? Lyran didn't answer. He didn't need to. The dread in his eyes spoke volumes. The Virakthal lingered in the asteroid field, a lone sentinel among the drifting remains of fractured rock and wreckage. The air inside the ship was taut with tension, thick enough to weigh on every breath the crew took. Commander Lyran Varric stood at the tactical display, his sharp eyes fixed on the fractured remnants of their earlier battle. The drones had retreated, leaving only silence in their wake. But the message still hung on the laser plasma display like a wound that refused to close. Test complete. Rylith Sakah approached cautiously, her boots soft against the deck plating. They retreated too easily, she said, her voice edged with suspicion. It wasn't a loss for them. It was data collection. Lyran nodded, his expression unreadable. They're building a profile on us. Our defenses, tactics, weak points. Every move we make feeds their strategy. And now, Rylith pressed, gesturing to the display. They've disappeared from the sensors. No trace, no pursuit. Why wait? Lyran's gaze hardened. Because they're not interested in fighting battles. They're planning to end the war before it begins. He turned to the comms officer, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. Patch me into Craghold Station. We need the Coalition ready for an immediate response. The command room of Craghold Station was alive with activity when Lyran's image appeared on their plasma wall. Coalition leaders of various species filled the chamber, their expressions ranging from guarded to outright panicked. The hum of overlapping voices created a dissonant murmur, broken only when the station's lead officer, Darren Axton, raised his hand for silence. You've got our attention, Varric, Axton said, his jaw set tightly. We've taken heavy losses and our fleets are scattered. If you've got a plan, now's the time to share it. Lyran's tone was clipped, his words direct. This isn't a skirmish anymore, it's an evaluation. Every move we've made has played into their hands. The humans don't need overwhelming numbers. They need us to overplay ours. If we don't regroup immediately, they'll dismantle the Coalition piece by piece. A voice from the council table interjected, sharp and biting. And how do you propose we fight an enemy that knows our every move? This isn't some territorial dispute, Varric. These are the humans. Their technology outmatches ours at every turn. Lyran didn't flinch, his response cutting through the room like a blade. We fight by not letting them set the terms. They adapt because we're predictable, so we stop being predictable. Hours later, Lyran stood at the helm of the Virakthal, overseeing the Coalition's regrouping efforts. Ships arrived in waves, battered but functional, forming loose formations in the asteroid field. The air on the bridge was heavy with the metallic tang of tension, every crew member focused on their station. Rylith stood beside him, her sharp features lit by the tactical display, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. We've established defensive perimeters, she reported. The remaining fleets are aligning their systems with ours, but it's fragile. One wrong move and we'll fracture again. They'll test us soon, Lyran said, his voice low. We need to bait them into overextending. Rylith frowned, the weight of his words settling on her. You're proposing we draw them in deliberately? Lyran nodded. A controlled engagement. We can't fight them directly, but we can force them to reveal more of their strategy. We need to understand how they think. And if we miscalculate? Rylith asked, her tone cautious. Lyran's gaze didn't waver. Then we won't live long enough to regret it. The bait was set. A decoy fleet, lightly armed frigates and decommissioned cargo ships rigged with explosive charges, was sent toward the edge of the asteroid field. Their movements were erratic, their signals deliberately chaotic, mimicking a disorganized retreat. The Virak-Thal and the main coalition fleet remained hidden deeper within the field, shields low and weapons primed for ambush. The bridge was silent as they watched the decoy fleet drift closer to the anticipated contact zone. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching longer than the last. Then, like a predator emerging from the shadows, the first human drones appeared. They came in a wave, sleek and silent, their surfaces shifting like liquid metal. Their energy signatures flared on the tactical display, and Lyran's stomach twisted at their sheer numbers. The drones moved with surgical intent, surrounding the decoy ships in a coordinated sweep. "They're scanning," Rylith said, her voice tight with anticipation. "Analyzing the decoys." "Hold position," Lyran ordered, his hand steady on the console. "Wait for their pattern to stabilize." The drones began to close in, their energy fields rippling as they prepared to dismantle the decoys. Lyran's eyes narrowed, his focus razor-sharp. "Now, detonate the charges." The display lit up as the decoy ships erupted in controlled explosions, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. Fragments of debris ricocheted off the drones' adaptive fields, disrupting their formations. For the first time, their movements faltered, hesitation rippling through their ranks. "Target their clusters," Lyran commanded. "Focus fire on the disrupted units." Coalition ships emerged from the field, their weapons unleashing a coordinated barrage. The air on the bridge crackled with tension as the battle unfolded. Each impact against the drones' shields, a small victory. But the celebration was short-lived. "They're regrouping," Rylith warned. "Their adaptive systems are compensating." The drones began to reform, their movements more fluid and deliberate. Their counterattack was swift, their energy bursts slicing through coalition ships with chilling efficiency. The Virak-Thal shook as one of the bursts grazed its shields, the impact rattling through the deck. "They're testing us again," Rylith said, her voice grim, "adjusting to our countermeasures." Lyran's jaw tightened. He knew this was only the beginning. The humans weren't just testing their defenses, they were forcing the coalition to reveal its playbook. The battle dragged on, the coalition forces holding their ground but losing ships with every passing moment. The Virak-Thal weaved through the chaos, its weapons firing in calculated bursts. Lyran's mind raced, searching for a way to shift the tide. Then, the comms crackled with an incoming transmission. The voice was cold, detached, and unmistakably human. "You fight well," it said. "Better than expected, but it is futile. Your tactics are transparent, your resolve fragile. You cannot outlast us." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Lyran's hands clenched into fists, his frustration boiling over. "Rylith, options." Her response was immediate. "We're outgunned and outmaneuvered. Our best chance is a full retreat." "No," Lyran said, his tone final. "Retreating now only proves their point. We hold." As the drones pressed closer, a new signal appeared on the tactical display, different from anything they had seen before. It was faint but unmistakable, originating from deep within the asteroid field. A human signature. Rylith's eyes widened. "That's not a drone. It's one of their ships." Lyran's pulse quickened. "What are they doing?" "Observing," Rylith said, her voice tinged with unease. "They're not here to fight. They're here to watch." Lyran's mind raced, the implications settling like lead in his chest. The drones weren't the main force, they were the opening act. The real threat was waiting, studying, preparing for the final move. "Send a coded transmission to the coalition," Lyran ordered. "Tell them to prepare for Phase 2. Rylith hesitated, her gaze meeting his. "And what's Phase 2? The Virak-Thal moved through the asteroid field like a shadow, its hull scarred but holding, its crew silently carrying the weight of uncertainty. The bridge was bathed in a deep amber glow from the laser plasma displays, each stream of data a pulse in the ship's fragile heartbeat. Commander Lyran stood at the helm, his silhouette sharp against the shifting tactical maps. His gaze was fixed on the single human signal that had emerged in the previous battle. The unknown was no longer theoretical. It was staring back. Rylith Sakah's voice broke through the suffocating quiet, her words measured but laced with unease. The signal's holding steady. It's not moving, not engaging. It's just there. Lyran didn't respond immediately. His eyes traced the readings, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that might provide an edge. The human ship, a solitary figure in the tactical web of chaos, was broadcasting something faint, deliberate, and maddeningly opaque. "Commander?" Rylith pressed, stepping closer. Her presence was steady, grounding, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of doubt in her tone. Lyran exhaled slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "They're drawing us in." Tynak Kalar, stationed at the comms console, looked up sharply. The faint pallor of his face had not lifted since the first contact. "Drawing us in? Why not just attack outright? They've already proven they can crush us." "Because brute force isn't the point," Lyran said, his tone cold. "This isn't about destruction, it's about control. They want us to react." To flinch. "And what happens if we don't?" Tynak asked, his voice cracking slightly. Lyran's eyes didn't leave the display. "Then they'll force our hand." The human signal pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically, a siren call in the darkness. As the leviathans inched closer, its scanners began to unravel fragments of data. The ship wasn't dormant. It was alive, its systems humming with a subtle, unnatural cadence. The energy patterns it emitted weren't random. They were deliberate, crafted with maddening precision, like a melody designed to unsettle. "Scanning frequencies," Rylith reported, her fingers gliding across her console. "The ship's broadcasting in cycles. Each frequency matches one of our communication bands. It's as if—" She trailed off, her brow furrowing. "They're speaking to us," Lyran finished for her, his voice dark. "Or mocking us." The display shifted suddenly, projecting a fragmented image. The bridge fell silent as the distortion resolved into a humanoid figure, a shadowy silhouette wrapped in light. Its features were obscured, but its presence was undeniable. The figure raised a hand, palm open, as if in greeting or warning. A voice followed, cold and layered, each word cutting through the air like the edge of a blade. "You seek answers. Come and take them." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge steeped in silence. The image lingered on the display, a specter etched into the minds of every crew member. Tynak shifted uncomfortably, his voice trembling as he spoke. "It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Rylith said, her tone sharp. "The question is whether we can afford to ignore it." Lyran's mind raced. The human ship wasn't just bait. It was a challenge, a calculated risk. But beneath the layers of strategy, he sensed something deeper, something personal. "Prepare a boarding team," he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. "If they want us to come, we'll go. But we do it on our terms." The boarding vessel detached from the leviathans, its sleek frame weaving through the asteroid field with practiced ease. The crew inside moved with disciplined focus, their armor glinting faintly in the low light. Lyran led the team, his movements deliberate, his senses heightened. The air inside the vessel was tense, every breath carrying the metallic tang of readiness. The human ship loomed ahead, its surface an intricate tapestry of shifting metal and energy. The closer they came, the more alive it seemed, its hull rippling with faint pulses of light that mirrored the rhythm of a heartbeat. It wasn't a vessel. It was a living thing. As they docked, the ship's airlock opened unprompted, revealing a dark, yawning corridor that swallowed the boarding vessel's floodlights. The team exchanged wary glances, their silence speaking volumes. Lyran stepped forward first, his boots striking the floor with muted finality. "Stay sharp," he said, his voice low but firm. "This isn't an abandoned relic. It's waiting for us." The corridor was unnervingly silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the eardrums and made every footstep seem deafening. The walls were smooth, almost organic, their surfaces pulsing faintly with an energy that seemed to breathe. The air was cool, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. As they moved deeper, the corridor widened, opening into a chamber bathed in soft golden light. The room was vast yet intimate, its walls etched with patterns that shifted subtly, as if reacting to their presence. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small crystalline object that pulsed faintly with light. Tynok's voice was barely a whisper. "What is that?" "Data," Rylith said, her eyes narrowing. "Or something like it." Lyran stepped closer, his instinct screaming at him to stop, to turn back. But he couldn't. The object seemed to draw him in, its light flickering like a dying star. As he reached out, his fingers brushing the surface, the chamber came alive. The walls erupted with light, projecting images that flooded the room. The crew staggered as their minds were assaulted by a torrent of information, fragments of history, battles fought and lost, civilizations rising and falling. And at the center of it all, humans. They were everywhere, their presence woven into the fabric of the galaxy's history. But this wasn't the history the Coalition knew. It was something darker, something hidden. The images shifted, showing humans not as conquerors, but as creators. Architects of technologies far beyond comprehension. Shepherds of a galaxy they had abandoned, not because of war, but because of choice. "They left," Lyran murmured, his voice barely audible. "They left because they were bored." Rylith's voice was tight with disbelief. "They abandoned an entire galaxy because they grew tired of it?" "Not tired," Lyran said, his eyes fixed on the projections. "Strategic. They knew the galaxy wasn't ready, so they waited." The images faded, leaving the chamber in silence once more. The pedestal pulsed faintly, as if it were alive, as if it were watching. Tynok broke the silence, his voice trembling. "They're playing with us. This is all a game to them." Lyran turned to face his team, his expression grim. "It's not a game. It's a test. And we're failing." Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The lights dimmed and a voice echoed through the chamber, cold and calculating. "Congratulations, Commander Varric. You've taken the bait." The walls began to close in, the corridor collapsing as the team scrambled to retreat. Lyran's heart pounded as he led them back toward the airlock, his mind racing. The humans had shown them just enough to sow doubt, to fracture their resolve. As they re-entered the boarding vessel, Lyran cast one last look at the human ship, its surface rippling with energy. They hadn't uncovered the humans' secrets. They'd only scratched the surface, and the humans had let them. As the boarding vessel detached and returned to the leviathans, Lyran felt the weight of what he had seen settle over him. The humans weren't just preparing for war, they were preparing for something far worse. "They're not just watching us," he said quietly, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "They're shaping us." The boarding vessel docked with the leviathans, the airlock hissing open with a mechanical groan that carried a weight of tension. Commander Lyran Varric stepped through first, his boots striking the deck with resolute purpose. Behind him, the team followed silently, their faces pale, eyes flickering with the images still burned into their minds from the human ship. Every step seemed heavier than the last, as though gravity itself was conspiring to slow them. On the bridge, the mood was no lighter. The crew worked under the dim amber glow of the heads-up displays, their whispered conversations snapping into silence the moment Lyran entered. He scanned the room, noting the tightened jaws, the nervous shifts of feet. The weight of command pressed against him, but he couldn't let it show. They needed resolve, not uncertainty. "Report," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness. Rylith Sakah, standing at the tactical console, turned to face him. Her expression was sharp, her movements brisk. "The human ship hasn't moved. Its signal remains active, but no additional activity detected." "Which means they're waiting," Lyran muttered, striding toward the central display. The tactical map flickered, showing the Coalition fleet repositioning in the asteroid field, their formations tight, but their movements tentative. He gestured to the display, his tone clipped. "And the fleet?" "Regrouping, as per your orders," Rylith replied. But morale is deteriorating. The commanders are questioning the plan. They want answers. Lyran exhaled through his nose, his gaze fixed on the display. They'll get their answers when I have them. For now, they hold position. A sharp beep from the comms console interrupted him. Tynok Kalar looked up, his face tight with unease. Incoming transmission, Commander. Coalition High Command. Lyran's jaw tightened. Put it through. The display shifted, projecting the image of a Coalition admiral. His face was stern, his voice heavy with authority. Commander Varric, your report indicates you've made contact with a human vessel. What have you learned? Lyran kept his voice steady, his words deliberate. They're testing us. Their tactics are designed to provoke a reaction, to analyze our weaknesses. This isn't an invasion, it's preparation. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. And you believe the Coalition can withstand their next move? I believe we can survive it, Lyran said, meeting the man's gaze unflinchingly. But only if we act decisively. Waiting for them to strike on their terms will be our undoing. And your proposal? The Admiral pressed. Lyran straightened. We counterattack. Not a full engagement. We don't have the firepower, but we can disrupt their strategy, force them to react. If we make them show their hand, we gain the advantage. The Admiral hesitated, his expression unreadable. You're gambling with lives, Varric. Lyran's voice hardened. We're already losing lives, Admiral. The only question is whether we lose them in retreat or in resistance. The silence that followed was suffocating, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Finally, the Admiral nodded. Very well, you have authorization. But if this fails... It won't, Lyran said firmly. It can't. The transmission ended, and Lyran turned back to his crew. Their eyes were on him now, waiting, questioning. He took a breath, steadying himself. Rylith, assemble the tactical leads. We're moving. The plan came together quickly, born of necessity and desperation. The Coalition fleet would split into two groups, one to hold the line, the other to launch a coordinated strike on the human drone's staging ground. The objective wasn't destruction, it was disruption. A single victory wasn't enough. They needed to fracture the humans' momentum. As the fleet mobilized, Lyran stood at the helm of the leviathans, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. Rylith worked beside him, her sharp focus unyielding, her presence a quiet anchor. Are we ready? She asked, her tone measured. Ready enough, Lyran replied. He glanced at the tactical map, his eyes narrowing. But readiness isn't the issue. It's whether they'll take the bait. They will, Rylith said, her confidence cutting through the uncertainty. They've invested too much in testing us to let this go unanswered. Lyran nodded, his gaze steady. Then let's give them something to answer for. The attack began with a burst of coordinated fire, the Coalition fleet descending on the human drones like a pack of wolves. The drones responded immediately, their movements fluid and unnervingly synchronized. They wove through the chaos with predatory grace, their adaptive energy shields absorbing the brunt of the assault. On the bridge of the leviathans, the atmosphere was electric, every crew member working with focused urgency. The heads-up displays flickered with constant updates, each shift in the battle bringing new challenges. Lyran's voice cut through the noise, sharp and unyielding. Target the flanks. Force them to split their formation. The Coalition ships adjusted their trajectories, converging on the drones' outer edges. The drones reacted, their movements faltering as they were forced to adapt. For a moment it seemed the plan was working. Then the human ship appeared. It emerged from the shadows of the asteroid field, its massive frame glinting with an almost organic glow. The Coalition's firepower turned toward it, but the ship's energy fields absorbed the strikes effortlessly. It moved with deliberate intent, its presence a stark reminder of the enemy's dominance. On the leviathans, the tension spiked as the tactical map lit up with new signals. Tynok's voice cracked as he called out, "Multiple contacts!" "They're deploying reinforcements." Lyran's stomach dropped. The humans weren't reacting, they were escalating. He turned to Rylith, his voice urgent. "Redirect the fleet. We need to regroup." Rylith hesitated, her eyes flicking to the display. "If we retreat now, we'll survive to fight another day," Lyran interrupted. "That's the priority." The retreat was chaotic, the coalition ships breaking formation as they pulled back into the asteroid field. The human drones pursued relentlessly, their movements calculated but unyielding. Explosions lit up the void, each one a reminder of the lives being lost. On the leviathans, Lyran stood at the helm, his mind racing. They had bought themselves time, but at a cost. The humans had shown their strength, their ability to adapt and escalate, and they had left a message, etched into the tactical map in stark, unyielding text. "You cannot win." Lyran stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He knew the truth of it. This wasn't a war they could win through strength alone. If they were going to survive, they needed something more, something the humans didn't expect. He turned to Rylith, his voice quiet but resolute. "This isn't over." Her gaze met his, her expression unreadable. It never was. The leviathan floated in the asteroid field like a battered predator hiding in its lair, its hull scorched from the last engagement. The bridge was a tense mosaic of dim lights, quiet murmurs, and flickering heads-up displays projecting tactical data. Commander Lyran Varric stood at the central console, his features carved with focus. Around him the crew worked silently, their movements subdued but purposeful. The coalition was bleeding. The humans' relentless pressure had turned a defensive retreat into a game of survival. Coalition High Command had fallen silent after the disastrous counterattack, leaving the scattered fleets to fend for themselves. Lyran could feel the weight of it in the air, the collective unease, the creeping edge of despair. Rylith Saka approached, her boots faint against the deck plating. She held a datapad, its screen flashing with unreadable streams of intercepted data. Her voice was low, controlled. "Commander, we've managed to decrypt fragments of their transmissions. It's unsettling." Lyran didn't look up. "Define unsettling." "They're not communicating strategy," she replied. "It's predictions, calculations of how we'll respond. They're simulating every decision we might make." Lyran's jaw tightened. The humans weren't just reacting. They were anticipating. He turned to the display, where the enemy fleet loomed like a storm cloud ready to break. "How accurate?" "Too accurate," Rylith admitted. "They've mapped our tendencies down to fleet movements and individual commanders' behaviors. If we stick to conventional tactics, we'll lose." Lyran stepped closer to the display, his mind racing. His voice dropped into a measured rhythm, a quiet resolve building beneath the surface. "Then we give them something they can't simulate." An hour later, the bridge was filled with the soft murmur of quiet conversations as the leadership team gathered around the central console. The laser plasma display illuminated their faces, casting sharp shadows that seemed to mirror the weight of the moment. Lyran's voice was calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "We've been playing their game," he began, his gaze sweeping across the gathered officers. "Every move we make, every tactic we employ, it's all data for them to analyze. That stops now." He tapped the console, and the display shifted to show the enemy fleet's projected positions. The human ships moved with chilling fluidity, each one interconnected, each one a cog in a machine that seemed impossible to outthink. "Our strength isn't in matching them head-on," Lyran continued. "It's in breaking their patterns. They rely on coordination, on their ability to adapt faster than we can. But that adaptability comes with a vulnerability." Rylith's brow furrowed. "You're talking about their network." Lyran nodded. "Every drone, every ship, every decision flows through a centralized AI core. They've perfected efficiency, but they've also made themselves dependent on it. If we sever the head, the body collapses," Rylith finished, her tone thoughtful. Tynock, standing at the tactical station, spoke up hesitantly. "But how do we reach their core? We've never even pinpointed its location." "We don't have to," Lyran said. "They'll bring it to us." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Lyran leaned over the console, his voice steady. "We create a vulnerability, something so catastrophic, so unpredictable, that their core has to intervene directly. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. The coalition would use the remnants of their fleet to stage a fake collapse, luring the humans into a trap. The Virak Thal would lead the charge, deploying experimental EMP disruptors that had been deemed too unstable for large-scale use. If successful, the disruptors would disable the humans' adaptive fields long enough for a strike team to infiltrate their flagship. The risks were immense. The disruptors were untested, and the strike team would be venturing into the heart of enemy territory with no guarantee of success. But as Lyran looked around the room, he saw no hesitation in his officers' eyes. They understood the stakes. "This isn't about winning," Lyran said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "It's about survival. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for the coalition, for every world that depends on us to hold the line. If we fail here, there won't be another chance." Rylith stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Then we don't fail." The final preparations were carried out with quiet efficiency. The coalition ships moved into position, their formations deliberately loose, their movements erratic. The illusion of a fractured, desperate retreat was painstakingly crafted, every detail designed to draw the humans into the kill zone. The Virak Thal was at the center of it all, its disruptors armed and ready. The bridge was a hive of activity, every crew member focused, their tension channeling into action. The faint hum of the ship's systems blended with the muted voices of officers relaying orders, the air thick with anticipation. "Enemy fleet approaching," Rylith reported, her fingers dancing over her console. "They're taking the bait." Lyran watched the tactical display as the human ships closed in. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, exactly as predicted. He felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly buried beneath the weight of what was to come. "Hold steady," he ordered. "Wait for my signal." The moment stretched, each second a lifetime. The human ships were close now, their adaptive fields shimmering faintly on the display. Lyran's hand hovered over the console, his breath steady. "Now," he said. The disruptors fired, their energy rippling through the field in a cascade of light. The effect was immediate. Several human ships faltered, their adaptive fields flickering and fading. Coalition ships pounced, their weapons carving into the exposed vessels with brutal efficiency. Cheers erupted on the bridge, but Lyran's focus didn't waver. He knew this was only the beginning. "Deploy the strike team," he ordered. The boarding vessel cut through the chaos, its reinforced hull absorbing the shockwaves from the ongoing battle. Inside, the strike team moved with practiced precision, their breath steady, their movements deliberate. Lyran led them, his resolve unshaken, his mind focused on the task ahead. The human flagship loomed before them, its hull a latticework of shifting light and energy. The boarding vessel docked with a metallic thud, and the team disembarked into the ship's eerie interior. The walls pulsed faintly, the energy within them casting strange, shifting shadows. The air was unnervingly still, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to their senses. "Stay sharp," Lyran said, his voice low. "This isn't over." They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps muffled against the smooth floor. The corridors were labyrinthine, their surfaces alive with faint patterns that seemed to shift in response to their presence. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, the silence pressing against them like a weight. At last, they reached the core, a massive chamber filled with a pulsing, radiant sphere of energy. The air crackled with power, the vibrations resonating in their bones. Lyran stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the sphere. "This is it," he said. "Set the charges." The team moved quickly, placing the EMP devices around the chamber's perimeter. But as the final device was armed, the sphere pulsed violently and a voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that was cold, calm, and infinitely aware. "Did you think we wouldn't anticipate this?" Lyran's blood ran cold as the room came alive with light. The walls shifted, revealing drones that had been lying in wait. The trap had been sprung, and the humans had been one step ahead. "Hold the line!" Lyran shouted, drawing his weapon. "We finish this, no matter what." The battle that followed was chaos, a desperate fight against overwhelming odds. The drones moved with lethal precision, their strikes relentless. But the team held their ground, their resolve unshaken. As the final charge detonated, the chamber was engulfed in a blinding light. Lyran felt the force of the explosion throw him back, the world spinning around him. And then there was silence. When he opened his eyes, the sphere was gone, its light extinguished. But the cost of their victory was etched into the wreckage around him. The light had gone, leaving the chamber bathed in shadows that seemed to breathe with the flicker of sparking wires and shattered conduits. Commander Lyran Varric pushed himself up from the floor, his body aching from the blast that had torn through the core. Around him the strike team stirred, their armor scorched, their faces pale but determined. The drones had fallen silent, their frames slumped where they had been when the energy sphere collapsed. For the first time there was no sound, no pursuit, no threats, just an eerie, watchful stillness. "Status," Lyran rasped, his voice hoarse but sharp. Rylith Sakah, blood streaked across her temple, staggered to her feet and checked the handheld scanner on her arm. Her fingers moved deftly, even as her breath hitched from exhaustion. "Core's offline," she said. "Whatever that thing was, it's not feeding their network anymore." Tynok Kalar coughed and winced, cradling his arm. "We just crippled their advantage, didn't we?" "We bought the coalition time?" Lyran's gaze snapped to him, unrelenting. "Don't assume they're finished. The humans don't fall that easily." He turned to Rylith. "We need to move. Whatever they planned for, it didn't end with us walking away alive." The words felt heavier than even he intended. Deep down, he knew the humans were still watching, calculating their next move. And yet, the chamber, the heart of their cold, unfeeling intellect, was now dark. There was a message in that, one they couldn't afford to ignore. "We detonated their leash," Rylith murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "But what happens when the Predator realizes it doesn't need one?" Lyran didn't reply, because he knew she was right. As they pulled back toward the boarding vessel, the ship around them seemed alive. The walls rippled faintly, a reflection of whatever energy still coursed through the human flagship. It wasn't activity. It was awareness. The humans hadn't just been monitoring. They had been waiting. They'd known all along that someone, someday, would come for them. When the team reached the docking point, Lyran paused, turning back to look at the corridor they were leaving behind. The faint glow in the walls pulsed once, a silent acknowledgement, and his chest tightened. It wasn't surrender. It was restraint. Back aboard the leviathans, the bridge was awash in reports and incoming transmissions from coalition ships. The human drones had gone still across the battlefield, their formations breaking apart as if the puppeteer had cut the strings. On the laser plasma display, the once overwhelming tactical map now showed fractured clusters of enemy forces. "Their fleet's in disarray," Rylith reported, sliding into her station. "Whatever we hit, it broke their coordination." "But not their will," Lyran said, standing at the central console, his shoulders squared. "Don't mistake silence for defeat. They'll recover faster than we expect." The comms officer turned suddenly, his face pale. "Commander, incoming transmission. Source unidentified, but it's them." Lyran gestured sharply. "On screen." The display shifted, and the bridge plunged into a heavy silence. The screen didn't show a face, only a void threaded with faint streams of light. And then the voice came, low and layered, reverberating through the air with chilling clarity. "You've proven interesting." The words were deliberate, spoken with the weight of a predator who had been amused, not threatened. Lyran's spine stiffened as the voice continued, a cold echo that carried no emotion. "We gave you warnings, told you to leave us be, but you couldn't help yourselves." A faint ripple of light moved across the display, like the stirring of some vast consciousness. "You wake us, and now you demand answers. Do you think we owe you that?" Lyran stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We didn't come here to beg for answers. We came because you made yourselves a threat, and we don't bow to threats." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the voice returned, tinged with something almost resembling amusement. "You misunderstand. We didn't make ourselves a threat. You did, the moment you woke us. The lights on the display flickered, and the voice sharpened. Do you think we slept because we were tired of fighting? We were tired of building for others. Tired of being asked. Tired of a galaxy that demanded but never listened. So we left, to let the galaxy grow on its own. And now? Lyran demanded, his voice unyielding. You're back to finish what you started? No, the voice replied. We're back to see if you've earned your place. Lyran's breath caught, the implications settling over him like a shroud. He stepped closer to the console, his voice quiet but firm. And have we? The voice didn't answer immediately. When it spoke again, it was softer, almost thoughtful. Not yet, but you're closer than we expected. You've shown fire, resolve. Perhaps you're not as fragile as we believed. The display shifted again, showing the human fleet beginning to pull back, their ships fading into the void like phantoms. This was a test. You survived it, for now. The connection severed abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Lyran turned to the tactical display, watching as the humans disappeared from the map. The Coalition ships began sending confirmation signals, their cautious relief palpable even through the data streams. They're leaving, Tynox said, his voice trembling with disbelief. They're just letting us go? Not letting, Rylith corrected, her tone somber. They're retreating to watch, to plan their next test. Lyran's hands rested on the console, his gaze distant. And when they come back, they'll expect us to be stronger. The bridge was quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. Lyran straightened, his voice cutting through the silence. We won today because we refused to be predictable, because we adapted. That's how we survive what comes next. Rylith's gaze met his, her expression steady. But survival won't be enough next time. No, Lyran agreed, his tone resolute. Next time, we'll have to prove we deserve to exist alongside them. The Coalition gathered what remained of its fleet, their forces battered, but unified. Reports from across the galaxy painted a similar picture. The humans had retreated everywhere, leaving behind only silence and the weight of their warning. High Command hailed Lyran's strike as a victory, a rallying point for rebuilding. But Lyran knew better. This wasn't a victory. It was a reprieve, a chance to prepare for the reckoning still to come. As the leviathans set course for the nearest Coalition stronghold, Lyran stood alone on the bridge, staring out at the asteroid field fading into the distance. The human's voice echoed in his mind, not as a threat, but as a challenge. Don't wake the humans, the old rule had said, and now they had. And the humans had not risen in anger, but in judgment. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had a purpose beyond survival. It had something to prove, and Lyran would make sure it was ready. As the stars shifted around them, he allowed himself a single, quiet thought. Perhaps waking them wasn't the end. Perhaps it was the beginning.